अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाजरीन। एज़ यूजुअल पहले की तरह हम डॉक्टर मनान अपनी तरफ से पुख्तून प्रोफेशनल कनाडा की तरफ से आज दोबारा आप लोगों के सामने हैं और हमने इस बार एक टैलेंट को ले आ रहा है जो कि हम उसकी तारीफ करा देंगे बहुत जल्दी। ये जो प्रोग्राम है पुख्तून प्रोफेशनल कनाडा, ये कोविड-19 जब से स्टार्ट हुआ है फरवरी से, हमने ये वर्चुअल लाइव प्रोग्राम स्टार्ट की है जिसमें हम मुख्तलिफ टैलेंट्स को ले आते हैं और वो अपनी स्किल, अपनी टैलेंट कम्युनिटी के साथ शेयर करते हैं ताकि कम्युनिटी को एक सपोर्ट नेटवर्क मिले। और ये भी हमारी मुख्तलिफ एक्टिविटीज़ का के साथ साथ ये भी एक वर्चुअल भी एक प्रोग्राम है जो कि हम लाइव करते हैं। और आज हमारे साथ जो मेहमान हैं वो अभी आने वाले हैं। डॉक्टर अलीम साहब है, सून ही विल जॉइन अस। वो डॉक्टर अलीम साहब जो है वो अम, इसके बारे में कहेंगे कि जो बच्चे स्कूल जाना चाहे, स्कूल मेडिकल स्कूल जाना चाहे और ग्रेड 11 या ग्रेड 12 में, तो पेरेंट्स की मुख्तलिफ एक्सपेक्टेशन होती है। पेरेंट्स जब आते हैं, न्यू कमर पेरेंट खासकर, उनकी ख्वाहिश होती है कि इनके बच्चे मेडिकल स्कूल में जाए इधर आके कनाडा में। तो वो सारे एक्सपेक्टेशन जो पेरेंट्स के होते हैं और कभी-कभी जो बच्चों की अपनी भी ख्वाहिश होती है कि हम मेडिकल स्कूल जाए कनाडा में, तो उन पे एक कम्प्रिहेंसिव ताकि एक इंफॉर्मेशन सेशन हमने अरेंज किया हुआ है डॉक्टर अलीम हुसैन के साथ। डॉक्टर अलीम हुसैन, वार्म वेलकम। डॉक्टर अलीम हुसैन फैमिली फिजिशियन है, स्कार्बरो में, मार्कम में रहते हैं। हम इससे तफसील से पूछेंगे इनकी अपने बारे में भी, लेकिन हम आपको वार्म वेलकम कहते हैं डॉक्टर अलीम साहब। तो क्वेश्चन, जो टॉपिक है करियर इन मेडिसिन फॉर हाई स्कूल स्टूडेंट इन कनाडा। क्वेश्चन सेशन से जाने से पहले डॉक्टर साहब वार्म वेलकम, और अपने बारे में नाज़रीन को थोड़ा सा अपना इंट्रोडक्शन करा दें।
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Mananto. I am the chair for the Muslim Medical Association of Canada. I also serve on the board for Penny Appeal Canada. In my professional capacity, I'm a family physician in Markham, and that's where I practice. I do family medicine and palliative care medicine. And Dr. Manan and I know each other from our time working on the board for Muslim Welfare Center. There, I was also one of the volunteer physicians for their free clinic. Professionally, I did my undergraduate at the University of Toronto Scarborough. I studied medicine at Wayne State University. Then my residency at University of Toronto as well. And then I started practice here in Markham.
Dr. Saab, warm welcome to you in this Pakhtun Professional Canada virtual live programs. सबसे पहले मैं आपसे एक सवाल करूंगा। बहुत से सवालात पेरेंट्स ने मुझे भेजे हैं और चंद स्टूडेंट ने भी भेजे हैं। मिल्टन में एक आदमी है, बड़ा एक्टिव रोल प्ले करता है, उसका नाम है डॉक्टर दाऊद खान। उसने भी कपल ऑफ क्वेश्चन भेजे हैं, खालगरी से सवालात आए हुए हैं। पहला सवाल जो एक पेरेंट ने भेजे, उसने कहा कि डॉक्टर अलीम साहब से पूछे कि ये बच्चों की जो एप्टीट्यूड, कौन से बच्चे, उसके लिए एप्टीट्यूड क्या होनी चाहिए बच्चों में, इन्हें कौन से क्वालिटीज, ये एप्टीट्यूड कब से डेवलप होते हैं बच्चों में जो ये ख्वाहिश करते हैं कि हम मेडिकल स्कूल जाए। तो बच्चों की एट्रीब्यूट्स के बारे में जो थोड़ा सा बता दें कि नाजरीन को।
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's very difficult to answer. I think the practical answer is that in order to get into medical school and to be successful, you have to have academic aptitude, and the best way to determine that would be is a student able to succeed, be at the top of their class in high school and in university, and obviously that's what you need to be able to get into medical school to start with, and then succeed in a career in medicine. That's obviously one of the first things they look for, because the actual training for medicine, both in medical school and residency, is quite challenging. And if it's felt that somebody is doesn't have the ability to perform at that level academically, then it's not the best option for them. So everybody develops differently. Some children might show their aptitude from a young age. Some may develop those skills later on in life. Life circumstance also plays a significant role. Some children may have great potential, but because of challenges in their lives, they might not be able to fully live up to their potential. So it's very different person to person. There might be even some people who through high school and university don't demonstrate their aptitude, and then maybe later on in life are able to identify their skill set and academically perform much better. So there are some people who they'll apply to medical school as mature students, meaning that they've maybe already worked for several years and are not just straight out of high school, not straight out of university rather. So everybody's different. I don't think there's any one answer I can give that applies for everyone. It really depends person to person. The basic answer is whenever somebody's able to perform academically well, but beyond that, there's also beyond academic aptitude, there's a need for emotional aptitude and really has the same desires of what they want to do professionally. And if somebody finds that they have that interest in the humanitarian aspects of medicine, and that's where their heart is, then maybe eventually their academic performance will catch up with their their hopes to perform in that type of a career. But if somebody maybe is very intelligent and has high aptitude but has no interest in that type of work, it doesn't matter how intelligent they are, they may not ever find that they have the appetite to do well in that type of career.
तो स्कूल में जब बच्चे होते तो हाई स्कूल में कौन से ग्रेड से, ग्रेड 11 से 12 से ये एप्टीट्यूड डेवलप हो जाता है, और वो उसमें अगर एक बच्चा मेडिकल स्कूल में जाते हैं तो कौन से सब्जेक्ट उनको लेने पड़ते हैं? क्योंकि आप भी इधर से स्कूल में गए हुए हैं, ताकि बच्चों को ये पता चले कि अगर वो मेडिकल कॉलेज या मेडिकल प्रोफेशन में इंटरेस्टेड है तो कौन से सब्जेक्ट और ग्रेड की क्या इंपॉर्टेंस है, तो उसके बारे में थोड़ा सा बता रहे ग्रेड 11 और 12 के बारे में.
So, I mean, the simple answer is that the best you can perform, that's all that really matters. What classes you take in high school to high school, I don't think actually makes too much of a difference, because your high school marks, unless you're applying to a very specific program, like, Queen's University has a program where you can get in straight into medical school track from high school, and they have the CEGEP program at in Quebec. Outside of those, which are very specialized programs, most people, it doesn't really matter when you're applying to medical school, for instance, what your high school marks are. They probably will request your high school transcripts, but those ultimately don't play a big role. That's an aptitude. I'd say that it develops at different times for different people. If somebody has the ability to perform well, they should try to start working hard from as young of an age as is possible. The question is, do you need to, obviously for university to get in, your marks from grade 11 and 12 matter. But does that mean you don't try hard in grade 10? Does that mean you don't try hard in grade 9? The best way to perform well in grade 12 is to perform well in grade 11. The best way to perform well in grade 11 is to perform well in grade 10. So the reason it's unlikely somebody's going to do very poorly grade 9, grade 10, and then all of a sudden do well in grade 11. The best way to develop the study skills and academic skills to do well in high school is to do well in the earlier years of high school, and then the best way to perform well in university is to study very hard in high school and develop the study skills. Right? Some people have greater intelligence, some people have less intelligence naturally, and some people have to work harder or work less to get the same results. But if if the average person who has to work hard to succeed, the earlier you develop those good skills, that's the better it is for you.
तो इस डॉक्टर साहब सब्जेक्ट मैटर करता है ग्रेड 11 and 12 में?
It matters only to the extent of what university you want to get into and what university program you want to get into.
लाइक मेडिकल स्कूल के लिए बायोलॉजी मैटर करती है, बायोलॉजी, ज़ूलॉजी या केमिस्ट्री, या अगर एक आदमी सोशल साइंसेज में जाता है, मतलब इन्हें फिजिक्स इस साइड पे नहीं आता, तो विल दोस पीपल कैन आल्सो गो टू मेडिकल स्कूल?
No, your high school courses don't really matter. No medical school again, unless you're applying to one of the very unique programs which they have at Queens or in Quebec, which are for high school entry from to a medical school track program. If we put those programs aside and we look at the vast majority of medical schools in Canada, there is no high school prerequisite to getting into a medical school. There are high school prerequisites to getting into university, but once you're in university, all that really matters is that you get the medical school program you want. So what?
तो
So
मेडिकल जैसे यूनिवर्सिटी में जाते हैं, मैकमास्टर यूनिवर्सिटी में हेल्थ साइंसेज में, तो यूनिवर्सिटी में तो ग्रेड 11 और 12 की सब्जेक्ट मैटर करता है ना?
absolutely, yes. So that's correct. So traditionally, the correct answer is that if you want to do the traditional path which many people will follow, which is that you uh, take high school prerequisite courses to get into a life sciences or health sciences program in university, and then you study health sciences or life sciences in university to go into um, medical school with those courses, then yes, you should take whatever the prerequisites are to get into those programs in high school or university. In high school to get into those programs in university. So, for instance, if you want to get into the health sciences program at McMaster, you should take whatever the prerequisites are for that program. If you want to get into life sciences, same thing. But you won't be penalized going into medical school if you do physics or social studies or any program really, as long as you've taken the prerequisites. So, for instance, if a medical school requires that you take biology, physics, chemistry, and calculus as a prerequisite courses to getting into medical school, as long as you take those 4 courses, it doesn't really matter what the rest of your program is. No university will penalize you or reward you for being in a specific program. So if you do well, if you take the prerequisite courses to get accepted into a medical school while you're at university, it doesn't matter whether you took those 4 prerequisite courses while you're a part of a life sciences program or a physics program or a chemistry program or a social studies program. There are some programs which are very competitive to get into, which traditionally have opened a path for people to do have better chances of getting into medical school. So, for instance, at McMaster, they have their health sciences program, which is a very competitive program that you have to have very high marks in high school to get into. And traditionally, people who will, or historically, people who have done well gotten into the life science or so the health sciences program at McMaster have a much higher likelihood of getting into professional schools like medical school or dental school out of that program, especially when you compare it to the percentage of the students that get into their regular life sciences program they get into the same medical or dental school program. So in that sense, it doesn't really matter what program you go into, as long as you do it doesn't matter what program you go into in university, as long as you have your prerequisite courses. So for instance, if somebody knows that they do very well in chemistry, and chemistry is their strength, and they will do much better in a chemistry program than they will, for instance, in a life sciences program. Uh, and then there's no harm in them doing a chemistry major, and they just do their medicine prerequisites and do well in those, which are like the 4 or 5 courses they need to do as prerequisites. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what the program is, because a medical school can't penalize you for the specific program. And for instance, if your family lives in Guelph or lives in Niagara Falls, St. Catharines, and you can only afford to go to the local university because it's too hard for you to live off campus, no medical school can penalize you for having gone to Brock University and St. Catharines versus University of Toronto. If you go to, if you're a sharp student, you live in St. Catharines, Brock University is your local university. You went there and they don't happen to have a health sciences program. They have whatever is a appropriate equivalent program or program that you can do well in. If you go and study in that program and you do well, no medical school can say, well, we only like students that are from University of Toronto, or we only like students that are from this school. They will treat all schools the same in that regard. And Canada is very different from the United States in that sense that all of our universities are public universities with very rare exception. And all of them have kind of similar standing compared to the United States, where if somebody goes to Harvard and they actually don't get very good marks at Harvard compared to somebody who goes to, let's say, a local community university and does very well, there's a high likelihood that the Harvard student with poorer marks will be viewed as a more competitive applicant than somebody who goes to a community university. So in Canada, that's what we're very fortunate with, which is that you can go to whichever local university is available to you. You can do whatever local programs are available to you, and as long as you do well in them, and you do your prerequisite courses for applying to medical school, that's really all that will matter at the end of the day. No medical school will penalize and say that, well, you did very well at your local university at the local programs that were offered, but we only liked accepting students from this specific university that takes this specific program. So the end answer really is that what the individual program, the individual university is not as important. What matters is that you do well and you get good marks. And again, it matters if somebody does better in gets better marks in chemistry, gets better marks in mathematics, gets better marks in psychology. They should take the majority of their courses and their classes in the types of courses they will do well in, and then obviously take their prerequisites. What won't work is if you do, let's say, chemistry and you take exclusively chemistry courses and you don't take the prerequisite courses for medical school like biology or uh, you know physics or something like that, and then obviously you can't get in if you don't have the basic prerequisites. But beyond the basic prerequisites for admission into a school, it doesn't really matter what school you go to or what specific program you do, as long as you fulfill the prerequisites and you have good marks.
ओके डॉक्टर अलीम साहब, ये जो एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम एक्टिविटीज़ होती है ग्रेड 11 या 12 के लिए, ये कितना इम्पोर्टेंट होती है? What does it mean, extra curriculum activity? Like what are those elements in it? Like once we say extra curriculum activity, really what does it mean? Like because आगे जाके यूनिवर्सिटी में या फिर नेचुरली बात है इन द लॉन्ग लाइफ लर्निंग में, अगर वो मेडिकल स्कूल में जाते हैं या किसी और करियर में जाते हैं, तो ये एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम एक्टिविटी कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है कि नहीं, या इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं है? अगर एक बच्चा है वो बहुत ज़्यादा एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम में एक्टिविटी में टाइम स्पेंड करता है, तो नेचुरली बात है जो बच्चा दिन रात स्टडी करता है उसका ग्रेड तो बेहतर होगा बनिस्बत उससे जो ज़्यादातर एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम एक्टिविटीज़ को टाइम देता है. तो हाउ इम्पोर्टेंट इज द एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम एक्टिविटी वन फॉर द ग्रेड 11 and 12 student?
For grade 11 12 students, they're important, right? But you have to look at what your intentions are. If somebody wants to get into a university, let's say, and get a big scholarship to go to that university, sometimes it will matter that you have extracurricular activities. I don't know if it's I'll put it this way: that if the question is framed around what is the relevance of high school extracurricular activities as it applies to getting into medical school, the answer is not as much. Your extracurricular activities probably in university will matter a lot more. But if you're a high school student that, let's say, wants to go to a very competitive program, like you mentioned, the health sciences program at McMaster earlier, that will make a difference because, getting good marks is good, but what if there's only 30 spots and there's 50 students that have very high marks? How are they going to differentiate between them? And one of the ways they'll differentiate between them is they'll say that this student got very high marks and was president of this club or volunteered for this organization. So we want to take them. And in fact, we might want to give them a scholarship because of what they did versus somebody who did very, very good in terms of academics, but then doesn't have the same level of extracurriculars. Or likewise, if somebody's applying for a scholarship, they want to go to university, but they want to get a scholarship so that some of the cost of the university is covered. In those cases, it probably will matter to some degree. But to your point, not everybody necessarily has the ability to perform academically at a very high level and do extracurriculars. If for somebody's ability, the reality is that with the time that they have, they can either put all their time into performing well academically, and that would be good enough, versus if they were realistically to put any time towards time consuming extracurricular activities, they would likely not do well, and there's a higher likelihood that they would not succeed academically. Then their academics probably matter the most, because a lot of extracurricular activities with poor marks is probably not very helpful for somebody. But if you have reasonably good or excellent marks, then an extracurricular activity is something good to add to that. And again, that probably matters a lot more for um, university than it does for high school. So high school extracurricular activities might help you get a scholarship to go to university or to get into university for a specific program like McMaster Health Sciences, but it won't really make much of a difference beyond that. Like I don't think anybody really, unless somebody did something exceptional when they were in high school. I don't think it really makes much of a difference what you did in high school in terms of extracurricular than you apply to um, university. If somebody did something very exceptional and they got like the Order of Canada or they got some award from the prime minister because they did some exceptional activity and raised $1 million for cancer research while they were in high school. Sure, that's a great story and that's something somebody can share. But I mean, outside of these 1 in a million type of stories, the majority of these things they'll matter to the extent of getting into university. But again, it depends on what your goals are. If you just want to get into like your local university's life sciences program, you need to get a 80 average, and you'll have to work very, very hard to get that 80 average to get into that program. And putting any time towards, extracurricular activities will put that at peril. Then that's probably not a good idea. But if you can say that my abilities, I can very easily get the marks I need to get into this program, but I also now want to do so well that I can get a scholarship, or alternatively, I want to go to the hyper competitive program like McMaster Health Sciences, or electrical engineering at or computer engineering at Waterloo. Then put just about everything you can into your marks, because that matters beyond everything else.
So how important is the volunteer work? And another question I can also connect to this volunteer work is that how will they manage the time? Like, is there any way, specific way that high grade 11 and 12 student can manage their time or the scheduling?
Yes, a good question. So volunteer work is good. I'd say just as a general thing for young people to do, because it shows the value of the time that you have, and for the people who are fortunate and privileged to have time to be able to help other people with it, it's a good thing to to get into the habit of doing, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely what I would say that I would encourage most young people to do volunteering in some extent, but do it to the degree that you can. I think you have to be realistic about what amount of time you can put aside, and that's why I'd say that volunteer work that maybe you do over a longer period of time is and you do maybe a fixed amount every week or month or couple of months is better than something that you do that eats up several hours a day for a few weeks, unless that's the type of time you have. So work with the time that you have. If somebody says that I can spare 1 hour every week, or I can spare 2 hours every month for a volunteer activity, then that's good. Then go and now is not a good time because of COVID, but under normal circumstances, maybe somebody would say that, okay, I can go and volunteer at a soup kitchen or at a homeless shelter, or at my local hospital's like gift shop or something like that for 2 hours a month. And then yeah, that's a good thing to do. And I think those things look well because it shows that you have a sustained commitment to something over a long period of time. If somebody only has few days over the holidays to volunteer for something, there's lots of things you can do there too. Like there might be some sort of a conference you can volunteer for, like your local masjid or community center might have some event happening, and you can volunteer to put some time into helping with that. So those are the types of things you can do. For myself, I'm part of the Muslim Medical Association of Canada. We do lots of events throughout the year, like we have conferences and programs. Most of these things are virtual right now because of COVID, but a lot of these programs would be in person. So if that's something you're interested in as a student, you can always go to our website, which is Muslim Meds, muslimmeds.ca. You can Google Muslim Medical Association of Canada, and we have a link on our website where you can click and you can sign up to be a volunteer. So that's one of the ways you can get involved. But other things you can check with your local masjid, community center, or whatnot, and help out with that, right? So I'd say that the best way is to look at what time you can offer. If it's you can offer a fixed amount of time every week or month, then do something that you can commit to doing every week or month. That is good. Like as I said, volunteering at a food bank or a soup kitchen or something like that. Again, when the time is appropriate, not during COVID. Um, but I think that's a good way to do it. Or alternatively, if you don't have that type of time, take when you have time off. So if people have like winter holidays or summer holidays and they can do some volunteer activity, then that's a good time to do it. There's no obligation that you have to do all your volunteer work during the school year. So if somebody's worried that I can't do volunteer work because it's going to affect my marks, then don't do it during the school year. Do your volunteer activity during the holidays or during your summer break, because then that won't affect your marks and you don't really have an excuse not to do it then.
डॉक्टर अलीम साहब, हाउ कैन किड्स डेवलप इन जो ग्रेड 11 12 के बच्चे हैं या यूनिवर्सिटी में जब स्टूडेंट चले जाते हैं, अभी यूनिवर्सिटी की तरफ चलते हैं, कोई हेल्थ साइंस के प्रोग्राम में हो या किसी भी प्रोग्राम में हो, ये जो क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग होती है, ऐसे राइटिंग होती है, ये भी एक स्टेज पे जब मेडिकल स्कूल के बच्चे अपने आप को प्रिपेयर करते हैं तो उसमें भी एक या इंटरव्यू लेवल पे या एमकेट के एग्जाम के स्टेज पे या किसी भी एक स्टेज पे क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग और ऐसे राइटिंग की कंपोनेंट होता है. ये कैसे, हाउ विल दे प्ले अराउंड टू डेवलप दो स्किल, हाउ कैन किड्स डेवलप दो स्किल?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd say that if we're looking for kind of a general piece of advice, I'd say reading is very good. I think reading is one of the best hobbies that somebody can develop. It teaches you a lot about. You can really read anything. I tell people that I think reading is a great skill, and it doesn't really matter what you read. Even if somebody reads a fantasy novel like Lord of the Rings, or they read Harry Potter, the children's books, it doesn't have to be a dense, kind of religious text, or it doesn't have to be a dense academic text. It could be something very, simple or easy to read, but I think reading helps people identify a lot about, sentence structure and the way words are put together and how, words flow well. I think it helps you use your mind. I think reading involves a lot of critical thinking as well. So if you're interested in those types of things, read books on difficult topics or on complex topics, or books that are written with deep meaning or text subtext to them. So I think that's one of the best hobbies somebody can pick up that will really help them with developing critical thinking skills. So that's definitely one of the things I would suggest that people can try. Reading is, I think, a very good hobby to pick up on, and then beyond that, writing is also good. So I think the best way to become a good writer is becoming a good reader. If you don't read very much, it's not likely that your writing will be particularly good. I don't think there's any authors or writers that only write and don't read anything beyond what they write. So I think the best way to become good at writing is to read. And I don't think it really matters what somebody reads. Somebody could read, if they're young, they can read children's books. They don't have to read books that adults read. They don't have to read purely, academic and dense topics. Just reading anything, I think, is a good hobby to have. Even if it's just reading the newspaper and or like reading articles. Sometimes that's a good short thing people can do. It could be anything. People could read like.
आपके ख्याल में डॉक्टर साहब वैसे बच्चों को डेली बेसिस पर कितनी घंटे रीडिंग करना चाहिए, या लाइब्रेरी में अपने आप को, आजकल तो कोविड-19 है, नेचुरली बातें हो सकती है लाइब्रेरी में, लाइब्रेरी बंद हो, लेकिन वैसे इन जनरल मतलब डेली कितनी आवर बच्चे को रीडिंग करनी चाहिए? और ये बच्चे जब सेल फोन पे होते हैं या टैबलेट पे होते हैं तो नेचुरली बात है, ये मूवी भी देखते हैं और चीज़ों को रीड भी करते हैं, तो वो रीडिंग भी काउंट होती है या उस पे टाइम ज़ाया, स्क्रीन पे टाइम ज़ाया नहीं करनी चाहिए बच्चों को? तो व्हाट डज़ रीडिंग मीन?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it doesn't really matter if somebody's reading an article on their tablet or their laptop or their phone versus reading it in a book. I don't think that makes a difference. But I think most of the time when people are using those devices, they're probably not using it for reading. They're probably playing games or watching videos, which is what the devices are kind of best designed to do. So, in terms of an hour amount, I think that's hard to say. Some people might not have that much time during the week, and everybody's circumstance is different. If There's a young person who's in high school, but to make ends meet and help support the family, they work at the family business a couple of hours a day, and or they have a part-time job that they do along with their studies. I won't say that person has to read 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day, but I would say that of whatever time they have, the majority of it, if they can put it towards reading, would be good. There are videos and things that you can do in terms of you, things you can do in your free time which are helpful. So it really comes down to how much free time they have, and I'd say as a percentage of their free time, if somebody's able to spend more time reading, and again, whether it's religious things they read or academic things or kind of like even fluffy things, just purely entertainment things that they read, I think that's actually try to make that the majority of the time, because I think anything you read, even if it has very minimal academic value, you learn something from it, even if you just learned a word that was used in that, or you learned a sentence structure, or you learn the way somebody can be clever with words. I think you learn something from it, and even if it's a joke book somebody's reading, or somebody's reading a book of Guinness book, like books that have very little academic value, like Guinness Book of World Records or something, you can just learn something by looking at that, or those types of things. I think you'll learn a lot more from versus games, or in some types of videos. I'm not saying that all video is bad either. You can watch videos that teach you a lot. You can also watch there's also games that are challenging, which are sometimes fun to do. But I would say, like, even a game that is challenging, like Scrabble's a game that somebody might play, which you work on your vocabulary, but it has a very limited value in terms of what you can learn from a game like that. So I would say that of whatever free time somebody has, try to put some of it towards reading, because reading is a very good skill. And no matter what study or field of study you go into, the way you will learn is by reading to some degree. So I think reading is probably what I would say is the best thing somebody can do to develop their critical thinking skills, because critical thinking involves just kind of thinking about things, and when you're reading, you're using your imagination, and you're conceptualizing things a lot more. So I think that's probably what I would say is the best piece of advice I would give to any child, and that can apply to anyone very young or even older, which is that reading is a very good skill. You can watch YouTube videos where people teach a lot, but I can say that even if you watch a YouTube video of somebody talking about something at great length, they probably learned all those things by reading, right? And they probably didn't develop their own knowledge by watching other YouTube videos. They probably developed their own knowledge from reading, and all the things that you watch, like if it's a TV show or something like that, whoever developed that program, they wrote it first, and they probably wrote it by being a good reader first. So I think reading is probably the number one skill I would reinforce. And I'd say that it doesn't matter what you read. Even if the child has a poor desire to read, they could read something very kind of minimal. It could be like a book about Iron Man, or a comic book or something like that, or it could be a knock joke book. It could start with something very simple and silly, but if it gets into the habit of reading, that's a very good place to start, because that will make them more interested in it. And because it's less stimulating, I think, than video or games, because with reading, all you have is the printed text in front of you, and everything that comes from that, you have to develop it yourself. Whereas if you play a game where you watch a video, everything's already presented for you. The audio is there, the visual is there, the color is there. So there's very little engagement that your brain has to do. So you don't have to actually think very critically, even at times, about what's on screen. Sometimes there's television programs and movies and videos you can watch that do make you think, but the majority of the time they're designed to be consumed very quickly and easily. But I'd say reading is probably the best thing for anybody to pick up.
ओके डॉक्टर साहब, तो ये तो अभी हम हाई स्कूल से निकल जाते हैं। एक बच्चे ने ग्रेड 12 कर दिया, अभी यूनिवर्सिटी की तरफ बच्चा जा रहा है। यूनिवर्सिटी की जो सिलेक्शन है वो कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है, और उसके बाद जो प्री मेड के कोर्सेज होते हैं, यानी एक बच्चा बायोलॉजी केमिस्ट्री की तरफ जाता है, दूसरा बच्चा हेल्थ साइंस की तरफ जाता है, एक बच्चा कहते हैं मैं इंजीनियरिंग में अंडर ग्रेजुएट करता हूँ, फिर मेडिकल कॉलेज में जा सकते या नहीं जा सकता। तो ये जो यूनिवर्सिटी की सिलेक्शन है ये कितनी इंपॉर्टेंट है, और फिर उसमें जो अंडर ग्रेजुएट के कोर्सेज होते हैं उसकी क्यों इंपॉर्टेंस है, दैट मेक ए डिफरेंस? क्योंकि हमने बच्चे को भी प्रिपेयर करना है, माइंड उसकी माइंड प्रिपेयर करनी है कि वो मेडिकल स्कूल में जाएं, तो इज यूनिवर्सिटी make a difference? Is the undergraduate courses taking make a difference?
Uh, so a good question. So ultimately, high school courses will only matter in terms of what program you get into. So, if somebody knows that they want to go to, Master Health Sciences, they should know what courses that they need to take in high school to get into that program. So that's an example of a program that's very competitive because once you're in that program, it's a higher caliber of student and they have much higher likelihood of getting into health sciences professions. In fact, that's what it's designed for them to be successful in doing so. So those high school courses matter the most in terms of what university you get into. Now, no medical school is probably going to care what high school courses you took. They will care about what your performance was in university. But obviously, by you can deduce that obviously if somebody graduated from McMaster Health Sciences, these are the courses they would have taken in high school. But yeah, so your high school performance, if you're in high school, is very important because that's what's going to help you get into university. But if you're already in university, there's not really much point in thinking about what your high school performance was. Now, with regards to medical schools will look at what courses they require as prerequisites. And most medical schools will not require very many. There might be between 3 to 5 courses that are prerequisites that they will require that you take. And it doesn't matter what program you were in when you took them or what school you went to. As I said before, that it would be kind of unfair for a medical school to say that, okay, if I was born in um, Sudbury, that because I was born in Sudbury and I live, 8 hours away from University of Toronto or from McMaster, and I don't have the financial means to be able to live on campus, that I should be penalized for being from Sudbury, and my degree from a Sudbury Lakehead University will be viewed as less valuable, and that's absolutely not the case. What matters is how you perform at each school, because it's wrong to penalize people based off of which school they went to. But in terms of what school you're choosing, I think there's several things to consider. If you have the option of choosing from more than one school, I think that the few things you look at are one is what is maybe the possibility of commuting to school versus having to live on campus. Financially, if it's not feasible for somebody to live on campus, where they would have to take very large loans that are very challenging for them to accrue or pay back. Maybe it makes more sense to go to your local university that you can commute to. Right now, it doesn't really matter because everything is online during the COVID pandemic, but I think that's probably one of the major things. If somebody lives in a very small town, let's say somebody lives in Napanee, Ontario, there's no local university. Any university they go to would be more than 2 hours away from where they live. Although maybe Napanee's not too far from me. But let's just say that, for the sake of argument,
Okay, that's up. Keep continue. इस दरमियान में छोटा सा ब्रेक आ गया 30
yeah,
सेकंड.
no problem. So I was saying that, if somebody lives somewhere where it's very difficult, let's say somebody lives in, Barrie, and it's not practical for them to be able to go to any local university from Barrie and commute, then it makes sense for them to, maybe live on campus. I would say that there's lots of value. There's lots of value in commuting if you're able to. Some people like the idea of staying on campus. I don't know how practical that is even going to be over the next few years. With the COVID pandemic, it might be increasingly sensible and logical for people who can commute to stay commuting. Obviously there's a cost saving if you can do that, and sometimes I can also cut down on other requirements. If you live with your family and you don't have to worry about purchasing food or cooking food, your food is potentially made for you. If that's your circumstance, not everybody has that possibility, but there's lots of value. There's lots of value in being able to commute from home. So if there's a local university you can go to that's reasonably good and you're able to go to that, then I think that's something to consider. That there's lots of value in that. If somebody has to commute because they live somewhere where it's far from any local university, then yeah, that happens, and that's reasonable. I think unless somebody, I think especially if you're applying to like a medical school, I don't think it really matters what program you go to, unless you get
बट डॉक्टर
specifically.
साहब ये जो हेल्थ साइंसेज है या प्री मेड की जो कोर्स है बायोलॉजी केमिस्ट्री, इनके अलावा अगर एक बच्चा हो इंजीनियरिंग में हो या किसी सोशल साइंसेज में हो थर्ड ईयर में, और वो उसकी माइंड चेंज हो जाए कि मैंने मेडिकल कॉलेज जाना है, सो विल देयर बी इज देयर एनी अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर देम टू दे कैन अपीयर इन कैट एग्जाम?
Yeah, so it depends, right? So each person's circumstance will be different. So if somebody is, let's say, one semester away from completing their uh, engineering degree and they have not yet done their any prerequisites for medical school and they've decided that they want to do it, they still can apply. They would have to just go back and do prerequisite courses or maybe extend their time in school to take those on. I have friends that have done engineering and went into medical school afterwards. So um, yeah, you can absolutely do that. Again, though, the only thing that would matter would be that you would still have to have good marks. Being in a challenging program like engineering wouldn't be an excuse for having very low marks and then expecting to get in, even though you may say that, well, my engineering program is a lot more challenging than this social sciences program. So that very much could be the case. So or alternatively, let's say somebody just completes their engineering degree, their marks are decent for their engineering program, but they don't quite have the marks to be able to get into medical school. They have the option of going back and doing a short, maybe 1 or 2 year, minor program in a program where they would get their prerequisite courses. So anybody can do that. Again, main things would be you have to get decent marks. So if somebody's in an existing program where their marks are decent and appropriate for getting into medical school, then for them it's fairly easy. All they really have to do is just do their prerequisite courses for medical school as part of their program, and then they can apply. And if somebody, let's say, decides that they want to switch into medical school, and let's say they were at University of Waterloo, which is a great program for computer engineering, and they're doing great because in their computer engineering program, but their marks are not quite what would be required for medical school, then they may be asked to, may want to consider going back and doing some studies that are doing another program or degree, quick degree where they can get good marks and then be able to apply.
So that's a good marks mean good GPA. Is this the only requirement for admission in medical school, or is there is also other criteria or other things also to be in consideration?
It's by far the most important criteria because it's the great equalizer, right? Which is that uh, GPAs are objective. So somebody who has a 4.0 GPA, a 3.9 GPA, these are very high GPAs. That's somewhat objective, right? That's versus if you were to base it off of purely extracurricular work. If somebody is the son or daughter of wealthy parents who could say that, well, for 2 weeks every summer we're going to send you to do relief work in a foreign country, and that you can put on your resume, then that's not really equal, right? It's understood that there's obviously privilege that goes into play for that. So marks are objective. So GPA is, I'd say, if there's a top 10 things to look for or top 5 things to look for, your GPA is probably 1, 2, and 3. Because if you do really well in terms of your GPA, that makes up for maybe shortcomings elsewhere. Let's say that you don't have the best extracurriculars, extracurricular activities, you don't have the best research experience, but your GPA is stellar, you still probably have a very good chance of getting in, versus if you have reasonably good research and extracurricular activities, but your marks are not very good at all, your chances are probably already gone, right? And it's easier to make up for poor extracurricular activities or poor research experience. You can make up for that in a summer. but you can't make up for a poor GPA in summer necessarily.
डॉक्टर साहब, मैंने कई लोगों से ये भी सुना है कि जिनकी जीपीए कंपेरेटिवली हाई थी, उन बच्चों से जिनकी एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम एक्टिविटीज ज़्यादा थी लेकिन जीपीए थोड़ा सा कम थी, तो कनेडियन बच्चों के लिए हर बच्चा तो बाहर नहीं जा सकता रिलीफ वर्क में, थर्ड वर्ल्ड कंट्री में, या
Agree, yeah.
जहाँ पे कोई मतलब ज़रूरत हो, लेकिन कनेडियन इन्वायरमेंट में बच्चे के लिए कौन सी अपॉर्चुनिटीज है जहाँ पे वो एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम करे, जो कि वो काउंट भी हो कंपेरेटिवली। अगर किसी की जीपीए 4 है और दूसरे बच्चे की जीपीए 3.9 है, लेकिन उसकी एक्स्ट्रा कुरिकुलम इतनी अमेजिंग है कि उसको अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल जाती है इंटरव्यू पे जाने की स्टेज तक, और 4 वाला रह जाता है, तो वो कौन सी अपॉर्चुनिटीज अवेलेबल होगा बच्चों के लिए कनाडा में, ताकि वो रात को घर भी आए और उधर जाके वॉलंटियर भी करें?
Oh, it's a good question. I think it's anything that you can do locally. You can do it at your local masjid. You can do it at a local community center. I think those are the best things. You know, you can volunteer at a food bank, or you can even find some sort of volunteer work you can do at your school. Those are often good opportunities, being involved in a club at school, because that's all built around school. That's not stuff you're going to have to do very much outside of school. I think those are kind of the best things to do, and those are the most practical. And I think that they actually do matter the most, because I think if somebody's evaluating a resume, and if I see somebody's did relief work in some country, I can logically think of, well, how did that person do that relief work? Somebody paid for their ticket to go there. Somebody paid for their lodging while they were there. Somebody paid for their food while they were there. Well, this person probably comes from some privilege, right? And that's why they're able to do this. So I don't think those types of things are actually as valuable as they're made out to be. And actually, you can even look at like groups like in the news recently, there was We Charity, which had to close in Canada. This was one of their major kind of business ventures, which was that they would have these Me to We, which was a organization where they would send people on relief mission trips, and that's kind of what it was about. It was that people would pay large sums of money to send their children to do relief missions, so they could come back and they could put that on their resume. So I don't think those are actually as valuable. I think there's a lot more to be said for sustained volunteer activity. If I see on somebody's resume that they volunteered every week for 4 years at the food bank, or once a month even for 4 years at a food bank, that to me shows commitment, and that person was committed to something, versus they said that I went to Pakistan and I worked for 1 week in a volunteer clinic. While that's very honorable and admirable, I would logically think that, okay, this person probably went to Pakistan as part of a family trip to visit relatives, and they did this while they were there on this trip, right? And that also tells me their family was wealthy enough to afford to go on that trip and whatnot. So to me, that's a 1 week volunteer activity, different from if they said, well, I go to Pakistan 4 times a year, and every time I go and I volunteer for 1 week at this clinic for poor people, then that's a lot more impressive. So I think one-off things is better than nothing. If that's all somebody can put, then do it. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you ask me what is the best thing, what looks the best, but also it's in terms of what gives you the best. What are you actually doing? Because you should also be doing something that's beneficial to people, not purely so you can write it on your resume. I mean, there's obviously a practical component to it. You think about what the benefit is there for you, but you also should say, what am I actually doing that's benefiting people? What am I actually doing that's helping somebody?
So when it come to the benefiting the people, is आपका मतलब ये है कि वॉलंटियर करना चाहिए या तो अस्पताल में, रेड क्रॉस के साथ अपॉर्चुनिटी अवेलेबल है,
Absolutely,
सीनियर
yeah.
होम में भी कम्युनिटी सेंटर है, स्पेशल नीड सपोर्ट के प्रोग्राम है जहाँ पे स्पेशल नीड के या टीन बच्चे होते हैं डिसेबिलिटी में जो भी इन्वॉल्व होते हैं। इसके अलावा हैबिटेट फॉर ह्यूमैनिटी है, रॉयल मिलिट्री कॉलेज है, या और भी कम्युनिटी रिक्रिएशन सेंटर है जहाँ पे, तो अगर कंसिस्टेंसी हो और लॉन्ग टर्म हो, न कि 40 घंटे हो, और मतलब है कि जिससे एक रिफ्लेक्शन हो कि the student really, the person really want to give back to the community,
Exactly.
have something invest into it, मतलब से have something significantly contributed to the community for a cause. आपका
Agreed.
मत तो ये जो आपने यूनिवर्सिटी में जब ये बच्चे जब ये बताइए कि रिसर्च वर्क इम्पोर्टेंट है फर्स्ट ईयर सेकंड ईयर स्टूडेंट के लिए will they play also a role in going to the med school in the process where somewhere they help to?
Research is important. It doesn't have to be done in the first or second year. I would say that while there's no medical school that will say that it's a requirement to get into medical school, I don't think I've ever met somebody that got into medical school without having some research experience. So nowhere is it explicitly going to be said that you have to have research experience to get into medical school, but it's also considered it's unspoken. Everybody should have that experience. And it's important because the reason the medical schools want to see it is because a lot of physicians do research, and if you have that interest in research, that's something that they would like. And the medical school might want to have a student who is a very good researcher to come to their medical school and then work with one of their doctors to work on their research projects, because that's something a medical school would be excited for. They are working on new cancer treatment, and they would want the best medical students with research experience to come to their medical school and work in their labs and contribute to their projects and one day do well, right? If you think about what are the schools people think of that are the most prestigious, they're actually the most prestigious because they have the best discoveries or research happen there. University of Toronto, they developed insulin there. That's one of the great discoveries in modern medicine. So that's why University of Toronto has its reputation, not because its introductory biology and psychology courses are better than the ones at York. York probably has just as good, if not better, introductory courses that an undergraduate student could take. But the prestige for different universities comes from what research has been done there. Same thing goes for McGill University, which is McGill is regarded very widely as, especially in the United States, as on par with their Ivy League universities there. And McGill University, if you go and take their first year courses, you're not going to get some exceptional treatment there that you wouldn't get at a different university. It's just that their research history at McGill is an exceptional research history. So that's medical schools, especially, and most medical schools will do some form of research. I think even this year, the Nobel Prize in Medicine went to some hepatitis researchers, one of whom was at the University of Calgary. So any medical school, this is their pipeline, right? If they see that if we get somebody who has good research experience from university going into medical school, that person might one day become an even greater researcher while they're a medical student, and then maybe they stay with our program and they do great discoveries in hepatitis or diabetes or cancer down the line. So that's why they will always want that. And even if you don't have an interest in doing research as part of your career, it's you should understand that any school is going to want to see that you do have some experience, and it demonstrates that you have critical thinking skills, and you can work in a team environment to some degree. So it is a very important thing to have on your resume, and it doesn't mean that you have to have done it from your first year. You could have done one summer of research, and nobody's expecting you to have any major breakthroughs, but it just shows that you have that on your resume, and anybody's going to want to see that.
तो डॉक्टर साहब, हाउ टू प्रिपेयर फॉर एमकेट एग्जाम? आप क्या टिप देंगे कि एमकेट एग्जाम के लिए, क्योंकि एमकेट ही एक डोर है दैट यू गो इनटू द इंटरव्यू स्टेज. तो एमकेट आप कोई टिप्स दे सकते हैं जो बच्चे मेडिकल स्कूल में जाना चाहे तो एमकेट को कैसे प्रिपेयर करें अपने आप को?
Yeah, very good question. So everybody studies differently. Really, for the MCAT, all you would really need to do is you can go on Amazon and you can purchase some MCAT preparation textbooks, and you could just read those and prepare for it that way. But everybody's different. If somebody really studies well independently by reading things on their own, then that may be all they really need. Some people like in-class instruction. So a lot of MCAT programs have virtual courses or in-person instruction courses where you sit down and you watch video and you're taught these things by instructors, and those are the things you then use on your MCAT. The one thing that I think probably everybody should do is that I think when you do these practice courses like Kaplan or Princeton Review, they all usually come with like practice exams, like practice MCATs that you can work through. that's probably the most important thing that everyone across the board should do, because it gives you, practice in terms of doing your timing and, am I able to do the exam fast enough? How am I performing under pressure? So that's probably something everybody should do. But in terms of the actual studying, everybody's different. So if somebody knows that they really value in-class instruction, then the in-class instructions they should take. If they know that they value being able to study independently on their own, then they should go ahead and do that.
डॉक्टर साहब ये रेफरेंसेस भी मैटर करती है मेडिकल मेडिसिन में जाने के लिए, और अगर मैटर करती है तो how will a kid get the references, and what kind of references they needed for the medical school?
Yeah, so good, very good question. So anybody can write a reference letter. Really what matters is that you shouldn't have any bad references, and the references you should have should, as best as possible, be positive. And if you can get very strong reference letters from somebody, even better. Most people will try to get at least 1 or 2 letters from university professors, or you can get all of them from your university professors. That's often a very good thing. Beyond that, if somebody has some unique experience that is very impressive, then they can get a reference letter for that. Let's say that somebody's at university and they are an elite athlete and they are on the university's tennis team or squash team or basketball team, and they get a reference letter from their basketball coach from the this University of Toronto basketball team, saying that this person was a very good team player, and they can write all these exceptional things about them. That's a good thing. Or somebody's a track and field athlete and they're a very good runner, and their track and field coach from university can write a very strong letter for them. And same thing goes for high school to, I guess high school to university, you don't really need it, but university to medical school. But so you can have unique references like that. Let's say somebody is a swimming instructor at their local community center or lifeguard, and they've saved people's lives at the swimming pool and performed CPR and whatnot. And maybe somebody from the community center writes a letter saying this person's been a dedicated, exceptional lifeguard for the last 4 years. We've seen them save people from drowning and perform CPR on people that have passed out. So that would be a good reference. But most people have at least a couple of their letters, majority if not all of them, coming academically. So let's say if you were fortunate enough to do research, you get one letter from the researcher who you worked with, and then maybe another letter from a professor that you had. Obviously, don't get any of those if they're negative. If somebody had a research experience and they thought the research supervisor was a very mean person and didn't like them, and is likely to write them a very poor letter of recommendation. Or alternatively, if their researcher supervisor may have been a fine person, but their experience was less than optimal, and they left a bad impression of themselves with the researcher, then it probably doesn't make sense to get the letter from them, right? It should always make sense to, I always tell people, when you ask for a letter, say, do you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter? And if they say that I feel comfortable writing you a strong letter, then I would feel confident in asking them. If they say, I feel comfortable writing you a letter, but I don't know you well enough, or I don't have the experience to say that I can write you a strong, positive letter, then it probably doesn't make sense to get the letter from them.
That's what I'm just asking you now, in the scale of 1 to 10. How important is 10 is the best, 1 is the least? The reference letter. If I ask you a simple mathematical question, where will you place the reference letter?
You mean in terms of importance?
In terms of importance, from 1 to 10. 1 is the least, 10 is the most. Where will the reference letter
It depends.
Somewhere.
It depends on the strength of the reference letter. So the reference letters are really there for the majority of the reference letters that we will get. Like 90% of them will be okay, meaning that they say very nice things about the person. They're the person, the referee says is a very good person, wonderful person. Definitely think you should accept them, but there's nothing exceptional about them. The reference letters, more than anything, are for one of two things. One is that the letter is actually negative, and this person who had a strong relationship with the person says that you absolutely should not accept this person. This person was very irresponsible and or I'm not sure that this person will actually be able to do it, or somebody gets a very exceptional reference letter where it's pages and pages long and it just does not stop talking about how unbelievable this person is.
No, in terms of I asking you the three score now. One is for reference letter, one is the least, 10 is the most. Um, where do you see the importance of that reference letter? Is it five
Uh,
plus
I would put it
in terms
as a
of going to a
five.
medical school?
Yeah, I would put it at a five, but that's because I think for
At
the
a five.
majority
So
of
one
people,
should have at least somewhere in 5, 6 plus. If I ask you the same question for the GPA,
yeah.
where will you see if one is the least and 10 is the most?
Oh,
Where,
GPA.
where can one place the GPA to go to the medical school?
So GPA is a 10, and the
The
difference is,
importance, the
yeah,
importance.
GPA is a 10 because GPA you can
The
have,
10, okay. Where
yeah,
will you put the research work if it is 1 and 10?
I would put it as maybe a 7 or an 8 because you need to have it, but most people don't have exceptional
7
research.
and 8.
Maybe a 7.
And the last one, the last but not the least, and I will ask you a follow-up question between. If I go to the interview
Hmm.
in the scale of 1 to 10, how important is the interview going to med school?
No, the interview is a 10, right? Because
10.
the everything prior to the interview just gets you to the interview, right?
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
marks could be
So
excellent. Your
yeah.
everything could be excellent if you go and fall asleep during your interview. It doesn't matter how strong of a candidate you are. Nobody's going
So
to accept
that
you.
interview skill, because now you are face to face with the professor or with the panel, and now the reflection will come from the high school. They will see the consistency, and in terms of resume and your lifestyle, how did you manage time schedule, plus compassionism, your caring nature, personality, the GPA, the research work, the volunteer hour, where did you done the volunteer work? So it's like it's maybe a very comprehensive. They analyze everything in much more detail while you are with
Actually,
them
no.
face to face. That's
It's
what
a
it
bit
means.
different. It's actually a bit different. No, so the interview is more so to see what type of a person you are, right? Because you've probably had anybody who works, you may have had colleagues where before they came to work with you, you read their resume and you may think one thing about them, which is that, oh, this person's very accomplished, very intelligent person, and then when they come and work with you, they're actually a very abrasive and difficult person to work with, right? Or you could have the opposite, which is somebody's resume is not that impressive, but when they come, they're a great part of the team, because you have to remember that these people who, especially if you're being interviewed for medical school, the doctors or residents or medical students who are interviewing you, they're interviewing you to be their colleague. So you could be the smartest person in the world, but if you're a jerk, nobody's going to want you to be part
Okay,
of
so
their
what
team, right?
what advice would you give to the student to prepare best for yourself for the interview? What are those few steps that you want to give to the student?
So you should do interview preparation. Practice makes perfect. So I would say that don't worry about first and foremost, don't worry about preparing for the interview until you have an interview. If you have an interview, then worry about it. If you don't have an interview, don't worry about that, because that's not a priority for you, and that's nowhere on your radar of things to worry about. If you have an interview, then you should prepare for it and practice as much as you can. The best way I would say is that if you have friends or family or relatives that are in medical school or do interviews, and work with them. If you don't, then the organization I'm part of, MMAC, the Muslim Medical Association of Canada, we do interview preparation for just about every medical school across Canada during the kind of end of the year, December, January time. So that's a good place to get preparation, and that's a good way to get in touch with people. But as I said, like, I would not worry about that until you have an interview. If you want to know about interview preparation prior to that, you can go on our website for Muslim Medical Association of Canada. Is again muslimmeds.ca, muslimmeds.ca, and we have PDF guides we've made for applying to medical school interview preparation, optometry school preparation, application. So lots of different guides you can look at, and that's a good way if you just want to, out of curiosity, know more about what the process is like. That's a good place to look. But again, that's not something anybody should worry about until they are interviewed or they have an interview in their hand, because being very well prepared for the interview doesn't matter if your marks are not good enough for you to get into the interview.
Okay, so डॉक्टर साहब आखिरी क्वेश्चन, जो बच्चे मेडिकल स्कूल से रह जाते हैं उनकी जीपीए भी 4 हो 3.9 हो, क्योंकि मेडिकल स्कूल भी लिमिटेड मेडिकल स्कूल है, लिमिटेड नंबर ऑफ स्टूडेंट उधर जाते हैं, कुछ बच्चे जो है बड़े टॉप के होते हैं रह जाते हैं, उनके लिए क्या अपॉर्चुनिटी है, वो किधर जाए, उनके लिए अल्टरनेटिव क्या ऑप्शन है आपके ख्याल में?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what somebody's academic performance and what their resume looks like at that point. Everybody's different. So if somebody says that, my GPA is excellent, my MCAT is excellent, I just didn't get in this time, then I might look at that person and say that, well, you should maybe try again. There are things you can do, like do a master's degree or something else to boost your application. If you're 90% of the way there, you just need some extra boost to get you over, then those are things to consider. But what if somebody says that my marks are nowhere close to being able to get into medical school? Then they should have a plan B, and it probably makes sense to have that plan B from the beginning. The challenge with applying to medical school, and this is kind of the same problem with applying to law school, is that the undergraduate degree that typically you will have to have or study to be able to get into those professions, in and of itself doesn't prepare you for a profession. And what I mean by that is that you could go into nursing, and the nursing degree you get prepares you for a very specific profession, which is to be a nurse. You can't just have a undergraduate life sciences degree from University of Toronto and become a nurse. You have to have the proper training to be able to do so. Similarly, you go to Waterloo to be an engineer, or you go to Ryerson to be an engineer or whatnot. That degree that you have at the end of your engineering program prepares you to be an engineer. But having a life sciences degree may not actually prepare you for any specific profession. So the challenge with that is that you then want to make that degree the best that you can to maybe have a plan B. So that could mean that if somebody says that my marks are competitive at the end of my undergraduate to get into medical school, but maybe I fall short of that, then you may want to say, well, I have good marks, so I can apply to something, and I'm interested in healthcare. I can apply to something similar. I can apply to optometry or pharmacy or dentistry. So there's lots of other professions, but again, a lot of that is dependent on you having the marks for it. If somebody can't get into medical school because their marks are nowhere close to being there, I think they need to be honest with themselves in advance of that. So if you need to have a 3.9, 4.0, 3.8 GPA to get into medical school, and by the end of your second year, your GPA is 3.4, you have to have an honest conversation with yourself about how likely am I to get the types of marks I need to get into dentistry, pharmacy, medicine. And if you don't have those marks, then there's nothing wrong with that. You can switch into something else. Maybe you decide to do a nursing degree or bioinformatics degree, or you tailor yourself to studying physiotherapy or occupational therapy. But you need to be honest with yourself about if it's statistically impossible for you to get the marks that you need to get into medical school, if you have one semester left and your GPA is 3.2, you're not going to have a 4.0 GPA at the end of that semester, right? So I think that's the best thing is have a plan based off of what your marks are, and every university will have an academic advising center. When you go to university, you're part of your tuition pays for these programs. So I would say if you don't know or have that guidance, then go and use that. That's exactly what it's there for. Those academic advising centers can often look at, well, these are the students that graduated from this program, and we know that these are the types of careers they want on to have. So that they can look at you and say that, well, your marks are maybe they are good enough to get into medical school, and so maybe you just need to apply, and we see this is how this works. Or maybe your marks are not quite suitable for that, but maybe you can have the marks to get into a bioinformatics master's degree, or you have the marks to get into a maybe you do social work from there because that's the part of medicine you like, which is working with people, or you know about what other options you have available. So I would say that
ओके डॉक्टर साहब, सो हमारे पास अभी टाइम की कमी की वजह से अभी हम उसको शार्ट करते हैं, तो आपका बहुत शुक्रिया आपके आने का, आपकी टाइम का। मुझे पता है कि आप लोग आजकल बड़े बिजी है और घर से भी पेशेंट को लुक आफ्टर करते हैं, फिर क्लिनिक में भी जो सीरियस किस्म के नेचर के लोग पेशेंट होते आते होंगे, और बिजी टाइम स्केड्यूल से टाइम निकालना, संडे का दिन भी है, फैमिली टाइम भी है, तो रियली हम आपका बड़ा मशकूर है कि आपने टाइम निकाला और कम्युनिटी के साथ आप बड़े वॉलंटियर मैं आपको नज़दीक से मैंने देखा है, हम मुस्लिम वेलफेयर सेंटर में वॉलंटियर बोर्ड ऑफ डायरेक्टर में भी रहे हैं। आपकी वजह से प्री मेडिकल क्लिनिक हमारे घर के सामने बनम तोप पे भी है और टोरंटो में भी है और दूसरे भी डॉक्टर उसमें इन्वॉल्व थे, लेकिन यू वर वन ऑफ द पायनियर जो आपने इसमें बहुत रोल प्ले की है। तो आपके आने का बड़ा-बड़ा शुक्रिया। लेकिन मैं आपसे दो जाते-जाते आप यूथ को क्या मैसेज देते हैं और उस फिर पेरेंट को भी एक मैसेज दे दें और उसके बाद हम खुदा हाफ़िज़ कहेंगे नाज़रीन को भी और आपको भी और इस प्रोग्राम को ख़त्म करेंगे। तो यूथ को एक मैसेज दे दें और फिर साथ-साथ पेरेंट को भी मैसेज दे दें।
Okay, so two pieces of advice is, well, number one, read. Reading, I think, is the best hobby to have. So try to read, and it could be anything. You can read comic book. You could read the novelization of a movie. Just read. Reading is very good. And the other thing I would say is that use whatever resources you have available to you. If you're at university, use your academic advising program and whatnot. And then also, use organizations like the Muslim Medical Association of Canada to your advantage, because there are people who will want to help you to be successful and succeed in your career. And there's people who will have this information out there to help the next generation. A lot of us only were able to have success in our careers because other people helped us along the way. So we want to help the next generation as well. So definitely look at our website, muslimmeds.ca, muslimmeds.ca, Muslim Medical Association of Canada. You also we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and you can follow any of those, and you can keep up to date with our events. You can volunteer with us, really whatever you like, and we're here to help you out for sure.
पेरेंट्स के लिए अगर कोई मैसेज देना चाहे तो दे सकते हैं।
Yeah, the best advice I'd give the parents is actually, look at the same resources. Is that your children don't have any information that is unique or is hidden knowledge. You can know as well as them what's out there and what their career options are. And I'd say that for parents, the best thing is that just be patient with your kids. Everybody develops at a different rate. Not everybody has the same level of ability to do everything. If you could be a very smart person, if you don't have if you have shaky hands, you can't be a surgeon, right? It doesn't matter how smart you are. So everybody's skill and intelligence and ability is different, and it's a blessing for those who do have it, but not everybody necessarily has it. So be patient with your kids if it takes them time, and try to give them whatever support they can. And similarly, look for whatever resources are available. If you're at their high school, there's teachers you can talk to, or tutoring programs. Try to get them involved in that. And similarly, if you're interested in a career in medicine specifically for your kids, look at what we have available with the Muslim Medical Association of Canada, and read through what our support documents say, and that will give you a good idea of what your children will need to succeed as well.